Let's do it.
Anything particular that I should say?
Are we on right now? Oh, look at that. We're live right now. So welcome to Life on Life's Terms. This is episode 8. And we have Archbishop Sylvain Lavoie, Emeritus. The great and powerful Archbishop himself is sitting here. He's written a book, Walk a New Path, which we're going to discuss today. And we're also going to discuss Together We Heal and his upcoming book. And we're going to probably start off on what it was like becoming a bishop. But if you want to just give us a little bit about yourself, Your Grace, that would be much appreciated.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. And I was born at a very early age on a farm in Saskatchewan. French-Canadian family, 6 kids, and a workaholic dad, codependent mother. So that kind of got me off to a good start. And that was really good growing up. One-room schoolhouse when I was a kid, St. Thomas College as a high school student, and the University of Saskatchewan. And somewhere along the line, God was chasing me, I guess. People were telling me I should be a priest. I ran away from it from about 4 years or so, and then ended up realizing when I was traveling with Up With People, I kind of escaped from university for half a year there and trying to sort myself out because I didn't know what my major was or why I was there. So I took 3 classes on the road, and there I realized I needed a lifetime commitment because I saw kids coming and going, and I knew it wasn't going to be marriage probably. One of the Brother Oblates gave us a retreat. He runs a Leb Shemaya retreat house in Texas. And he gave us a course, and he mentioned that word unmarriageable. And I thought that kind of explains it. I think it just didn't seem to fit. You know, I couldn't never tell a girl I loved her or whatever, and bothered them quite a bit. But in the end, I decided, well, I guess maybe I should try it out. So I ended up coming back home and not really just deciding to go from there to novitiate. And once I got to novitiate, I felt the same peace I felt at home when we said the rosary or after Mass on Sunday. And I thought, okay, I guess I'm where I'm supposed to be. And it went from there.
Wow, that's great. So that feeling of acceptance was in that moment, I would suspect?
Yeah, acceptance, certainly. The guys there were really friendly, but also a kind of belonging.
Excellent.
I knew I was where I belonged, and it's been that way ever since.
And there's no turning back, I guess.
Not really. No, there wasn't for me anyway.
So how many years were you parish priest?
Well, I was a missionary in northern Saskatchewan for 15 years. And then I did some language learning and came back in a different diocese for about 12 years, I think it was. And then after that, that's when I was made a bishop in 2005.
So how does that selection happen?
Well, the bishops in Canada have a list, and they keep and when they meet once a year, they sort of share that list, and people put on that list names of potential candidates that they think. I don't think I was on that list. I think my predecessor just knew me and decided he wanted me to follow him. So he phoned me one day and he said, "Sit down. Are you sitting down?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I put your hat in the ring for to succeed me as Archbishop of the diocese." I could hardly believe it. I was kind of shocked, and I said, "You got to be kidding!" And he said, "No, I'm serious." So I said, "Can I think about it?" "Yeah, you have a week." So I did a retreat, and I did an Ignatian discernment. You know, I made a list. If I say yes, the pros and cons. If I say no, the pros and cons. And after that weekend retreat, I came back and I phoned him up and I said, "Well, you know, the no list is a lot longer than the yes list. So, okay, give me your reasons," he said. So I gave him all the reasons, and he kind of blew them all away. And he told me, "You have to have a very good reason to say no." And I don't think I had a good enough reason. So I had to say yes, I guess. So I did.
Well, that's great. How long did you stay in that position for?
Well, that was 2005, and it was really something. Although I think my biggest enemy was myself, because I asked him, "How do I run a diocese?" He said, "Well, do it your own way," which wasn't too helpful. I was coadjutor, supposed to be a coadjutor for a whole year. Well, after 3 weeks, he said, "Why don't you take over and I'll help you," instead of the other way around. So, well, okay. And that's when I asked him how you run a diocese. "Well, do it your own way." So I did, ran it like a provincial or an office of a religious congregation, which probably not the best way to run a diocese. And that I would kind of did that for about half a year. Then he decided he was ready to retire fully and leave. And he wasn't well. So he talked to Nuncio into that. So bingo, half a year later, I was Archbishop of the diocese. And So we rolled with that for, I think, about 6.5 years or so, till about 2011 or 12, in and around there. And what happened there is what happened when I was provincial of the Oblates of Mary Immaculate. I had a workaholic burnout. And that's why I told him when he asked me if I was going to be a bishop, I said, well, what happened? Remember what happened, 10 years ago, whatever? And he said, that's a long time ago. So,
Wow.
However, I guess I didn't learn my lesson the first time around, so I had to have that lesson taught to me the second time around.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized, okay, I wasn't meant for administration. A bishop has 3 jobs, which is teach, govern, and sanctify. And there's Latin terms for all of that. And after those 2 workaholic burnouts, I realized maybe I'm not meant to govern. So I resigned from governing the diocese, which leaves me teaching and sanctifying full-time. So basically teaching and liturgy, celebrations, and stuff like that. And actually, I think I'm busier now as an archbishop at large than I was when I was running a diocese.
So I remember you saying a little while ago that you're 3/4 an oblate and 1/4 a bishop, or was that the other way around?
Okay, as a bishop, I had 3 of those jobs. I'm doing 2 of them, so I'm 2/3 of a bishop. And when you become a bishop, you're no longer fully a member of the congregation. They no longer can give you an obedience. You don't have a voice anymore. You're like a diocesan priest. And so I'm kind of on my own that way, my own account, my own car, that type of thing. So I'm half an oblate. So I tell people I'm 2/3 of a bishop and half an oblate. And if you do the math, that adds up to more than 1. So good enough.
So your travels as a bishop, did you get to go to the Vatican and Rome many, many times in that capacity?
First trip to Rome actually was when our founder was canonized, Saint Eugene de Mazenod, 1995. I really enjoyed that trip to Rome. That was my first time in Rome. And then when I became a bishop, I had to go for the bishop school, and that was in 2006. I kind of had to wait till the next one. And so I was there for a couple of weeks for that bishop school, and stayed there for another week of holiday in between. And then the ad limina visit came along. So that's when the Western bishops visit every 5 or 6 years. And so they came, and I joined them and spent another 2 weeks in Rome with them as part of the ad limina visit. And during that, but before that happened, I had to go to Rome because it was an archbishop. So I went for the pallium. So I made a trip to Rome just to get this pallium that you hang around your neck, made from sheep's wool that the Pope blesses. And that's the first time I met Pope Benedict, twice, at the pallium itself, and in the audience the next day. And then was at the bishop school. We met him again at Castel Gandolfo. We had a motorcycle escort, 2 buses and 99 bishops to Rome.
So where would you rather have been, in the car or on the bike?
I think on the bike. But that was quite an experience. Then I met Pope Benedict the 3rd time, and then during the ad limina, we had a general audience with him. So that was the 4th time, I think. And then we had a one-on-one, which was quite a kind of a photo op, but also 10, 15 minutes with him just talking about the diocese. And I shared with him the letter I was working on. He had just written his first encyclical, Deus Caritas Est. And so it was kind of exciting. And then the last time was we had skipped one of our congregations we were supposed to visit, and we went to a general audience on Wednesday morning, and we were sitting right behind him. And after that, he came and shook our hands, and that was the 6th time that I met him. I thought, and he said, "What, you again?" No, he didn't really. But kind of exciting.
That's really exciting. I think for a lot of Catholics, we don't understand the formation of a bishop, and we don't understand how that happens, and how the selection process happens, so on and so forth. So that's really eye-opening, I think, for anybody who, whether they're Catholic or not. I mean, we hear the title bishop, but we don't really understand, I think, where that all comes from and how that selection happens. So I thank you for clarifying that. My next question for you is, how did you get involved in addiction work?
Well, I think I came by it fairly naturally. My father was a workaholic, out-and-out workaholic, I would say, and that's pretty devastating. That's about as harmful as a chemical addiction. It's a process addiction. He couldn't let go of work. He was working on the farm picking roots at the age of 80, and he had a stroke, a minor stroke. And so the next day we took him to the hospital, and the day after that he had a major stroke and passed away. So by the time I was 16 years old, I realized something was missing. And I wanted to just go hunting and fishing with him. We never did. He worked 6 days a week. On Sunday, we went to church on Sunday morning. Sunday afternoon, he rested. And then Sunday evening, he was getting the equipment ready for Monday. So I began to resent that. And for about 15 years or so, I tried to change him. I tried to smarten him up. I tried to convince him that he was wrong and I was right. And I've learned since then that that's the latest addiction in the world today. Everybody wants to be right. He thinks I'm right, she's wrong. She thinks I'm right, he's wrong. And what drops out is the relationship. Well, my relationship with my dad dropped out for about 15 years because I was busy proving him wrong and thinking I'm right. I became a workaholic myself. I learned it from my dad and became fairly codependent for a while, learned that from my mother. And so I grew up with addiction, and I saw what it did to me, and I saw what it was doing to others. The other thing that happened was I was sent up north as a young missionary, and the first thing I did the first day I got there was attend an AA meeting because they were having it in the rectory. And then once I became pastor, after about 3 weeks, the priest who was supposed to teach me Cree left because there was nobody in Pine House, so then I was in charge of this village. And I thought, I better get going. So then I started going to the meetings every week, and I was giving a little spiritual talk, which is what I thought I was supposed to do for about a whole year. And but my style of living up there, my ministry style, was sort of workaholic. I was lacking self-awareness. I think a lot of people maybe lack that. We don't really see ourselves as we are. Yeah. Other people have to tell us who we are. Because when I went up north in 1975 as a young oblate missionary, I didn't know I was workaholic. I didn't know I had a a way of being called Mr. Fix-It. I didn't know I had a Messiah complex. I didn't know I was carrying a fair bit of anger towards my dad. I just thought, I'm trying to fix him up, that's all.
Yeah.
And other stuff as well. It was amazing. I was educated, I was ordained, but I lacked a lot of self-knowledge, self-awareness. So that's why in the writing I've done, I really spent some time speaking about self-awareness. And after about a year of going to these AA meetings, I was getting more and more frustrated, not from the meetings, but from my ministry, because nothing was changing. After about a year, somebody came up to me and said, "Father, you've been here for a year already. Nothing's changed, has it?" Well, I could have shot the guy. That's the worst thing you could tell me. And I was really frustrated. Things weren't going the way I planned or thought they would. And I was getting very frustrated. And I was going to these meetings, and these were trappers and fishermen and laundry workers and cooks at the residence, and they were happier than I was. They were joking and laughing, and I'm sitting there with a smile on my face, but my stomachs are going upside down, and I, tense, and this is crazy. I'm the priest, and they're better off than I am. So one day I asked Alec, who was chairing the meeting, I said, "Is it okay if I join this program?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." He said, "People use AA even if they're not alcoholics." So, however, it took me about 3 weeks to work up the courage because I was afraid of rejection. If they knew who I really was, I wasn't perfect as a priest, they'd reject me. That was pretty scared, but something inside was pushing me, and I think it was the Holy Spirit. And so anyway, one meeting, they always kept me for the last, and Alex said, "Father, you want to say a few words?" And I said, "Yes, my name is Sylvain. I'm a friend of alcoholics, and I want to join the program." And for the first time in my life, I shared my guts out. I really told them what I was feeling, what I was going through. And I was scared. My hands were sweating. My knees were shaking. We stood up to say the Our Father after that. Had my eyes closed. I just stood there. And somebody grabbed my hand and shook it. And then somebody gave me a cup of coffee. And it was amazing. I felt the power of love there. I felt belonging, acceptance. And it felt like I was a member. That was amazing. I'll never forget that. That was the power of fellowship.
I can definitely attribute to that. When I first came in, my sponsor, actually, he was doing an H&I meeting, so hospitals and institutions. This is where they come to the institutions and they tell us what it's like in recovery. Like, what does recovery look like after treatment? And he was there talking, and I got my weekend out from the treatment center that I was in, and I went to a CA meeting, Cocaine Anonymous, and who was there as I was walking down the stairs into that meeting? My future sponsor, right? And again, I sat there, I cried very, very hard in that first meeting with a bunch of strangers. And the listeners know my past, as you do as well. I'm not a guy who's gonna cry in front of strangers, let alone in front of my family. And I cried, and they all came around me, and I felt accepted, truly accepted. I was able to be who I am without the facade or personification. And I think when we don't have that self-knowledge, it's because we're running into that personification.
Sure.
And we want to be this thing as opposed to what we really are. And who we really are is way more spectacular than what we could have ever put on, you know? And when we get to that place, it's amazing, you know? And I think all of us, whether you be a pickle or a cucumber coming into the rooms, I mean, you feel that feeling of acceptance, whether you do a set of steps or not. I mean, if there's anything that these programs can give you, it's the sense of true fellowship. You know, you can go into any church, and there are particular people within that church that may be able to share that kind of fellowship, but it's not the same as people who have gone to war. Like we've gone to war, you know, and we're veterans from the worst war ever, and that's addiction or lack of self-knowledge and living in denial about who we are and personification of some facade, right? And then when we regress from that and we pop that ego balloon.
Well, I think it's called our false self. A lot of us, we live out of our false self, and I didn't know who I was, so I was living out of my false self, kind of projecting who I thought I should be, or it's kind of phony. Like I didn't really know who I was. I remember Richard Rohr giving us a retreat in Saskatoon to the Oblates the first time I met him. And his first sentence was, "You are who you are, who you are. What are you afraid of?" Well, I just about fell out of my chair because I was afraid of myself. I didn't know who I was, really.
Yeah.
And I had this feeling that, this thought, if people really got to know me, they wouldn't like me. Like if they really knew who I really was, that's not a pleasant place to be. No. And I was there. Didn't want to stay there. So thank God this came along. I think the program really helped me, because it wasn't just the power of the fellowship, the belonging, acceptance. After that, I was invited to go to the Ella Cross Northwest Alcohol and Drug Rehab Center that had just opened up, 1976. Like I joined the program, bingo. Within a week, I think they had me up there giving a talk on what? I didn't know what. Just asked me, "Do you want to come and give a talk?"
Yeah.
So I thought, well, maybe spirituality is a safe topic. I didn't know much about it, so I went and I started talking, and I talked for about a half an hour, I think, and people were asking questions. I got some ideas, and then said, "Well, can you come back next week or next month, whatever it was?" I can't remember, but anyway, that started it. And then a half hour became an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, became an afternoon, a day, a workshop, a retreat of 7 days, became a book in the end. PowerPoint presentations, keynote, and it became a book.
Yeah.
And it was working the steps. Once I had started giving those talks, I started working the steps, and that was amazing. I mean, that was a healing experience. I started becoming aware of my defects of character that I didn't know I had. One of the first ones was impatience. I mean, I got caught driving dangerously. And I had to face up to that and apologize. And where's that coming from? Well, I guess I have maybe an addictive personality. I'm addicted to rushing or whatever, you know. And
hence why you're on a scooter today.
I paid the speed limit coming down. I love the scooter. Better than that. But then I found out that I was we were at a meeting, and my fellow oblate told me that night, at the meeting today, I felt that no matter what I said, they do what you want anyways. And I thought, oh my God, I'm giving off the impression that I'm in charge here, that I'm in control. We're trying to co-pastor the community. And that's when I learned that I was controlling. And I've had to struggle with that. That's upset people at least 3 different times after that. But it's much better now than it used to be. But the program helped me with that. That's one of my defects of character. I had to go back to step 1. Well, I'm powerless over my tendency to control other people. And that's one of the false gods in our society right now. My God, everybody's after power and control, and it's all over the place in marriages, relationships, and jobs and work. Everybody. Yeah. It's crazy how people, they're so insecure. And that's what I've learned too from the program, is that our first primary defect of character is human insecurity. We're just not loved enough. And so we become insecure. Then we start getting jealous and touchy, and we want control and power and whatever. And, stubbornness is another one. I had a guy tell me that I was stubborn. I argued with him. He said, "No, you're stubborn. You always got your own way." I thought, "No, I'm just strong-willed." Well, I lost that argument, But there's another defect of character I had to work on, and that the program helped me through that as well. The biggest one, though, was the resentment I had towards my dad. Like that was, in fact, that was very interesting because in the Living with Christ Today, as I mentioned to you earlier, there it was. You know, they had that story in the Living with Christ with an ad for the book, Walk a New Path. But that was a major experience that I owe the program, that reconciliation, because 15 years I was struggling. And in 1978, I remember I was at a retreat one time, and we were advised to forgive our parents, especially our fathers. So that's a good idea. So I said a prayer and thought I had. Went home, visit. Well, nothing much changed. 2 years went by, and I was thinking, I don't know, it didn't seem to improve very much. And then I visited a family, one of my missions, and the little girl, 6 years old, was asleep on her dad. And I remember driving home and just feeling lonely, self-pity. Why it wasn't like that when I was a kid, angry. And suddenly I realized I haven't forgiven my dad. I can't. I'm a priest. I've been ordained for 2 years, 3 years then, and I can't forgive my own dad. And I got kind of scared, kind of panicked. I said, what do I do? I'm preaching love and forgiveness every Sunday. Do I have to, quit the priesthood or something? And then the word powerless popped into my head from the program. I thought, okay, step one, I'm powerless over my anger, resentment, my inability to forgive my dad. That was bit. Step two, I can't do it. God can. Step three, I'll let him. And then step four, I'm driving across a bridge there, and it's like an invisible mirror popped up, and for the first time in my life, I saw how I had treated my dad for 15 years, as opposed to focusing on what he did or didn't do for us. And that was major. That was my step four. It was like, oh my God, look what I did to my dad. So I got home, and I phoned Brother Oblate up there in the north, and I told him the whole story, and he was in the program as well. And in step six, how to let go of this defective character, my unforgiveness, I had no idea. Step six, most people go to rehab centers, do step five, and then they're out and they're kind of graduated. And it was interesting, one of the reactions to the book comes from Father Vaughn Q, who is 53 years sober. He's a former goalie for the Flying Fathers.
Oh, yeah.
And he invited me to go to a retreat that they have for recovering priests down in Florida. And he phones me up and he says, Lavoie, got your book here. And he says, and in my 53 years of sobriety, I've never had step six explained to me in a way I could understand.
Wow.
I go to step six meetings, there's silence. No one knows what the heck to say. So he said, we're having this retreat and I want you down there. So he flew me down and he sold a box of books for me. So what happened was that I was stuck. Like I didn't know how to forgive my dad. And then I think the Holy Spirit stepped in. I caught myself criticizing the sister's cooking at breakfast one morning, the sister that was our cook and pastoral worker. And then it hit me, maybe because of Marriage Encounter that I had just taken, 1978. I thought, if I'm acting like my dad, I realized I've become like my dad. I'm critical, just like him. And if I'm acting like him, maybe he's feeling like me. And I was able to make that jump from my behavior to his feelings. And for the first time in my life, suddenly I understood my dad. A 78-year-old man who's full of these emotions that I'm struggling with, doesn't know what to do with them. No one's ever taught him. He had no idea. So no wonder he's a workaholic. The only time he was really at peace was when he was out working and medicating his pain.
Yeah.
And bingo, the forgiveness was there. It was instantaneous. It was just amazing. I've learned since then that forgiveness is a process. When it happens, it can be instantaneous, and it was. The anger was all gone. I drove home that Sunday after Mass, and I sat down with him, and I told him, Dad, I think I understand now. Please forgive me. We were reconciled. I even told him, Papa, je t'aime. Dad, I love you.
Yeah.
Once in my life, I did that. His reaction, he froze. He didn't know what to do. It was amazing, but he changed overnight.
Wow.
And we had 2 good years before he died. I was so angry at him, I didn't know if I could do his funeral. But after that, no problems. We could talk about stuff. And when I celebrated his funeral 2 years later, I celebrated knowing that we had been reconciled. And that made all the difference, and it was a joyful celebration, and that's what I celebrated. And thank God for the 12-step program.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's a great testament to what these proposals, as they say in the big book, what they can do for us. You were talking about love. I don't know if you've ever heard of a fella named Dr. Gabor Mate.
Oh yeah, I've used some of his videos.
One of the things that he was suggesting was that this implicit memory, when we're children, what ends up happening is, when you look at your kid or your child in your arms and a parent's eyes, they fall in love with their child. Well, so does the child. The child falls in love with their parent.
Mm-hmm.
But then what ends up happening, and that is a flood of endorphins into the child's brain, and these feel good things. But when it's an addict mother or father, that love isn't the same. They fell in love, but it's not as strong as like a normal family, so to say. And then we as addicts pick up that cross looking for it in whatever we can find. And one of the things that definitely attributes to that, me being a heroin addict, is heroin. Alcohol will do the same thing as well. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the feeling of euphoria from work and what you've accomplished can do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So
I've learned that from WA, which I'm a member of WA, Workaholics Anonymous. We started in Edmonton here 3 years ago now. And I didn't know before that it's not just a process disease or addiction, it's a chemical addiction. Because the rush, as you were mentioning, we get from intense work, it stimulates the brain. There's a chemical reaction, and that's the feeling good comes out of that. And it's a process and chemical addiction.
And I think that's the key that we need to understand is really our addiction is not the drug or the drink that it really is. Basically, what it boils down to is the feeling of the chemicals that we're looking for. You know, I don't have a cocaine or heroin addiction. I have a Justin problem, and that Justin problem needs to be looked at every day. The fellow that we had in here yesterday, Jeff, we really dived into what it's like to destroy that ego and destroy that personification, because that's really our shield from from really looking internally into ourselves, you know. And we got into what it's like to actually love ourselves and to practice what success is as well, you know, and we went really deep into that. And I think that's also what the 12 steps give us as well. You know, it gives us when you look at daily moral inventory every day, daily moral inventory is showing you, so today this is what you didn't do very well. Tomorrow it will be your goal. You will achieve it. And by achieving it, you are now practicing success time and time and time again. And so when we look at the process of that, just in that daily maintenance, I mean, we have to acknowledge and accept as addicts that we self-sabotage almost 95% of what happens in our world. The other thing I'm just going to throw out here is some stats that I found today. About 90% suffer from abuse from parents. So those who are like 90% of addicts suffer abuse from parents. 75% of women have experienced sexual abuse. 56% of men were sexually abused as a children. And sexual abuse victims are 3 times more likely to suffer depression. And 1 out of 6 women and 1 out of 33 men in America have been sexually abused. And so this is the precursor, so to say, to your book, Healing.
Together We Heal.
Yeah, Together We Heal. That's it. So when you came up with that book, that's before Walk a New Path, but it's along the lines of the 12-step program. How did that develop? How did that book come around?
Actually, I was in the process of writing another book. My first book, put it that way, Drumming from Within. Actually, it was the first book, but it turned out to be the second one.
Okay.
Because in the process of writing that book, I was involved with quite a few victims of sexual abuse who were coming kind of like spiritual direction, but just to deal with their issues and getting more and more involved with them and journeying with them and getting to the point where we could actually meet with their abuser and sort of, I call it communicating with love. Some would call it confronting them, but I prefer communicating with love. It's a whole process that the scriptures and the program has taught me. And there was kind of an urgency to that. So I sort of put writing Drumming from Within on the side, and I focused on writing Together We Heal, which is a method of dealing with sexual abuse using the 12-step program. And so I kind of wrote that fairly quickly, actually, and printed it myself and then started handing it out and using it. And so that's how that got written, was just dealing with sexual abuse victims and helping them journey through their pain.
Wow. So the research essentially was just personal experience
with
working?
Experience mostly, yeah.
Wow.
I don't think there's any references in the book. It's quite like a booklet. I just wrote it just to help people that I was journeying with. And but it turned out okay. It's showing up in different countries, I guess. It's
so
kind of interesting.
How has that process been successful with what you've seen with people going through with some people would call confrontation, and you were saying it's communication with love. How is that?
Okay.
How is that working out?
I think it's working out really well. I'll give you an example. I have her permission, but I'll change her name anyway.
Okay.
We'll call her Velma. She was raped by someone when she was 14, and then she fell in love with his brother, and she married his brother. So her rapist became her brother-in-law, and she lived in the same community with that man for about 13, 14 years. And I always wondered how come she had such an edge to her. She was very involved in the church, parish council or whatever, but there was anger there, I could tell, and I could hear it sometimes if I'm going to visit their home, and I could hear her screaming and hollering, and then I'd knock on the door, and bingo, there's peace and quiet. But I thought something's wrong here somewhere. And then her brother-in-law's son molested her daughter, and then he disappeared. They moved back to her home community, and I lost track of her. Years later, I got a call from her, and now her son had molested her daughter, her granddaughter, her daughter's daughter. And so she blew the whistle. They got him to, I think, a detention home somewhere in a city in the south. And she fell apart. There was 3 generations of sexual abuse in her family. And I said, Velma, you got to go on a healing journey. So guided her through a 12-step healing journey. She went through the steps one by one, cleaned house with step 4 and step 5. And then she came to step 6, which is you get ready to have God remove your defective character. And hers was her anger and bitterness towards her brother-in-law. After starting off that whole series of events that led to her grandchild being sexually abused. She did that well. She sat down and she wrote a bunch of letters, and finally she had a letter that she could share with him that was following Matthew chapter 18, verse 15. And I think that's maybe the least understood and least practiced passage in the New Testament. It's so simple, and yet it's quite a challenge. But anyway, it's this. Jesus says if somebody hurts you in the church or whatever, anywhere, any way, and psychologists give us 2 options, fight or flight. So if you're angry, you're going to fight. If you're afraid, you're going to flee in all kinds of ways, addictions or silent treatment or whatever. A friend of mine whose dad was alcoholic and abusive, had sexually abused her. She said that when he would come in tipsy, she would try to disappear. She'd try to be invisible or freeze. So I think we had those 3 options, fight, flight, or freeze. And what she was able to do is go beyond that to forgive. And that's what Jesus says. Go to those persons instead of fighting, fleeing, or freezing. Tell them how you feel. Well, most translations say point out their fault. So this is coming from Jesus himself. It's scripture. it's God teaching us what to do. If somebody hurts you, don't fight, flee, or freeze. Go to them. And if Matthew was writing today, I'm sure with the greater knowledge of psychology, he would say, just share your feelings with them, and then tell them you're trying to forgive them, and then you let it go. Bingo. You are doing what Jesus did on the cross. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And what happens when sexual abuse victims can do this with their abuser, they're just like Jesus on the cross. Father, forgive them. There's no revenge, no getting even, no name calling. You're just communicating with love. What's happening is they're taking that pain inside of them, feeling it, honoring it, validating them. And when they do that, they're living a commandment, which is love yourself. We're supposed to love our neighbors. We love ourselves. So and most people, lots of people don't really love themselves. They don't pay attention to their feelings. They stuff them. And every time we stuff our emotions, we're actually emotionally abusing ourselves. We're not loving ourselves. We're actually breaking a commandment. Most people don't know. And anyway, so she broke that cycle, and she started really loving herself, getting in touch with her feelings, feeling them, honoring them, validating them, naming them, writing them out. So she emptied herself of those emotions. And then we met with her brother-in-law, and she cried her way through the letter to him. So that's what's happening there is she's loving her enemy, which is one of the commandments. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hurt you. He had made himself her enemy, even though he was her brother-in-law, because of what he did to her. And so she was able to forgive him by just giving him back those emotions, that dark energy he had stirred up in her. And not instead of hanging on to it, she gave it back to him with love. She communicated with love. And in doing that, she was just like Jesus on the cross. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And what Ron Rolheiser, one of my brother Oblates, points out, when you act like God, you get to feel like God. Your dignity comes back, your innocence comes back, your self-esteem returns, because you're just like Jesus on the cross, and it doesn't get any better than that. And I thought, this is pretty powerful stuff. When the scriptures and the program come together like that, it's powerful.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, even Bill W. said as he was writing it, that was not him writing the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Inspired by the Spirit.
Yeah, and him and, well, Bill and Bob, right, were the two writers.
Yeah.
Bob was the editor, I believe. But they both said that there was something compelling them to write it the way that they wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can literally look at the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and dissect it step by step through the entire book, which is pretty amazing.
Oh yeah.
You know, like I don't think people really recognize that, how special or spectacular that book is to alcoholics.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, alcoholics do, but people from the outside don't. And to have normies who actually decide to take a set of steps and look at what that is. I mean, my question to them is always, can you do what an addict has to do in order to change?
Yeah.
Would you ever place yourself in their shoes and go to those lengths of willingness in order to change your life?
Mm-hmm.
Because they are leaps and bounds.
Yeah.
You know, a normal person catches themselves lying and they just say, I'm not going to do it again. An addict will go up to the person that they lied to and say, hey, guess what? I lied to you yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't mean to. I like to take back what I said. I'd like to do a do-over. Mm-hmm. and could you forgive me?
Mm-hmm.
You know? And that's very, very vulnerable.
Yeah.
Normal people don't do that. And even in the context of when you're saying about loving ourselves, Jeff and I yesterday, we went real deep into that, because that's a process. I mean, I could kind of like myself in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I literally mean that, kind of like myself. Yeah. Then I was okay with liking myself. Then I became okay with, maybe I could love myself today. Mm-hmm. And now I place the challenge in front of myself to make sure that I've loved myself physically, which means I've gotten some sort of physical activity that day. I loved myself emotionally that day. I loved myself spiritually that day. And I was of service to somebody if the opportunity was provided to me. And if I can do those things daily, my moral inventory is a whole new, I mean, I have a good benchmark, right? Yeah. So I think in looking at that, that's really good. But you were saying that the process with the sexual abuse victims that you were working with, the process that you've kind of laid out through the 12 steps has been very, very successful.
For sure. The couples or the people involved, I would say, they would say so.
So I'll do a shout out. You can definitely find that book on Amazon, and I found it on Amazon today.
Walk a New Path.
Yeah, you can find Walk a New Path, and you can also find. I'm
not sure if Together We Heal is on there. Is it?
Yeah, I found it today. Actually,
okay,
people buy it together. Apparently, is what Amazon says.
Oh,
so,
all right.
So, and what I'll do is at the bottom of the YouTube description, I'll put a link to Amazon where you can find the book. And
it's also available from Novalis, the publishers. Novalis, Novalis. In fact, they're advertising it in the Living with Christ.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice.
So
the other thing about the book is that you had mentioned the way you look after yourself, physical and mental, which reminds me of the medicine wheel.
Yeah.
And the book is sort of a blending of 12-step spirituality, Judeo-Christian spirituality, and indigenous spirituality, because I use the medicine wheel all the way through. Because of my ministry among the indigenous for years, and I've learned so much, and there's such a rich spirituality there.
Yeah, I have read the book, and what I like about Walk a New Path is it's a description to a normie.
Well, I'm supposed to be a normie, I think. I'm a cucumber, I think.
And so I loved it for that fact.
Well, one of the reasons I wrote it was not so much for AA members or members of the program, but for everybody else. Because anybody can use, like the way I use it for myself, it was just an amazing healing journey. And it's for families or people who love it, people who are addicted or just want to know more about the program or the steps or whatever. So it's kind of like a pretty general, meant for everybody book.
And I like your own, how would you call it? Like the drawings.
Oh yeah, the illustrations.
Yeah, the illustrations that you put in there, they're great. I mean, I think it gives a really good picture of the process itself.
That comes from the invitation to give talks at the Yellow Cross Rehab Center.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a blackboard there and chalk, so I started drawing everything because, the indigenous people like to see, and they're very visual, and became chalk talks. And those chalk talks became PowerPoint, that became Keynote, and it became illustrations in the book. So
wow. I mean, this book is very fantastic in that you go into your personal story pretty deep into this book. Yeah,
I kind of think, why not? I mean, if it's going to help people, like, I guess my life's kind of like an open book, and I think transparency is pretty important. And what's there to hide anyway? And we're all human, and we all need to help each other.
And I think, even...
Can I give a quote from Jean Vanier that really helped me? Jean Vanier is the son of the former Governor General of Canada, and he's began the L'Arche movement for the mentally challenged, homes for people who are mentally challenged. And he's learned a lot from them. And one of the things I heard him say was this: if we're humble and open and honest enough to share our weakness with our brothers and sisters, it frees them to be humble, open, and honest enough to share their weakness with us, and then together we grow.
Wow.
That's been a principle for me ever since, I think.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, yeah, like I said, the how personally you get in this book blew my mind away. It really did, because it's hard for addicts to see, I think, normal people going through the same kind of trials and tribulations. Like as we started this podcast off and you were talking about the identity and looking for what that was, I can totally identify with that. And the fact that you have the insight of what that missing link is a huge deal. I mean, normal people don't see that. You know what I mean? And sure, as you said, you're a normie, but I don't think people really have that insight. And I think, like Jeff and I kind of got into this yesterday, society itself right now is an addict. It's a society of outrage, and they're so extreme. They're back and forth, and they're always outraged about everything. Yeah. And you kind of touched about society today, and Jeff and I, we both kind of looked at each other and were like, we're two sober addicts that are looking at the world like an addict in active addiction. That's how the conglomerate, the group is working and moving. And I think that's because we lost the formation of how to appreciate our own self-worth. Yeah. And pop culture itself has really pushed in ego and pride and all of these things that don't make you happy. I mean, if you look at even Jeff, like he's a great big guy, and he is a pro athlete all around, but he was even talking about his own insecurities. So then that got me thinking, well, maybe Joe Frazier had insecurities. That's why he was a boxer. Like, that's why he went to that extreme. Maybe all these athletes who go to this extreme and become an idol, the reason why they become an idol is because they're so missing inside. Yeah. A lot of historical figures, like Napoleon is one, apparently, and there's quite a few others that somebody reflected on that. A lot of the dictators in the world, were kind of really inadequate or feeling insecure, and they had to move in that direction just to prove themselves. And it's funny to watch now. Like I said, society's run riot. Yeah. It's run riot. Like it's an addict who looks at problems and they can't fix them. And they can't fix them because they don't understand the solution. The solution is within self.
Yeah, and I think the false gods are what people get addicted to, and those are basically the three temptations, like possessions and pleasure is one. People want money and pleasure. Second one would be fame and prestige. It's about being somebody like better than everybody else. Gossip comes from that, and that's another addiction as well. And then the biggest one, I think, is power and control. Yeah. People are falling for those things left and right and think that that's what's going to make them happy, and it's not.
And that's what I love about Walk a New Path. You give an example of how you can turn that around. Yeah. You give a flat out example of you need to really take a look at self, because acceptance is the key to all of my answers today. It's not about changing my dad or changing the circumstance that's coming my way. Manipulative behavior only gives us more manipulation.
Right, exactly.
Right? It's not going to smoothen anything out. And that's what I love about Walk a New Path. You're basically challenging people to say, hey, wake up. Wake up. Take a self-appraisal of yourself, and this is the key to your success. This is the way how you can change, and you do it in language that normal people will understand. I mean, if you read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't think normal people would understand the stories in there because they're not a pickle, and and you need an interpreter. Even us addicts, we need an interpreter in order to get through that book. And with Walk a New Path, you're able to overlap the big book and actual experience and how to use these things practically within your life. And this is the formation that I think a lot of men and women are missing. They're just missing this, right? So your next book coming up, what's it called?
Still Green and Growing. And it's basically on personal growth, inner healing, and from a second half of life perspective, because everybody's living longer nowadays, and we don't really have a spirituality for our wisdom years. So, and I'm picking up a lot of that from Ron Rolheiser, one of my brother oblates, and Richard Rohr is one of my mentors. Wrote the foreword for this book, actually. And it's supposed to be published in the spring, so hopefully, if all goes well, it'll come out in the spring.
That sounds great. How long did you research?
That one, I gave a talk at the Los Angeles Religious Education Congress a couple of years ago, and that was the beginning of it. I kind of thought, I put a lot of work into that talk, and I thought, gee whiz, that's what I've been focusing on for myself, and if I can put it into words and write it out a bit more, and just slowly over those 2 years became a book.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So is that formed from the 12A, like the 12-step perspective, or totally different perspective?
Very indirectly, because I wanted to reach a different audience, different crowd, just a different segment of the population. And I thought, I've done this one here, Walk a New Path on the Steps. And so this is basically from a different perspective, basically spirituality, human growth, just being human and living life to the full.
Wow.
And scriptural as well. And there's a little bit of the steps in there. I'll sneak them in here and there.
So what does the future look like for yourself? What kind of goals have you set up for yourself in context of the program and living life on life's terms, so to say?
Well, it's good to be home. When we began the WA program here, and finally, for the first time in my life, I felt like I'm where I belong. Like I've been through AA, Al-Anon, ACOA, Emotions Anonymous, even got the big book one time, but couldn't find anybody to join it. And then Codependence Anonymous. Finally, I was told I'm not codependent. I'm too darn independent. So, and when this book came out, I said, I got to have a fellowship somewhere. So I contacted somebody in North America, in Canada actually, who was wanting to start WA, and we got it going. And it's been going ever since. We're a small group, 4 to 5 people, but it's a powerful little group and love it. So that's certainly on the horizon. And then I think, developing retreats, and I'll continue writing. And right now I'm actually revising a book that somebody else wrote in the States. I met him down in Los Angeles, and it's bringing the Tao Te Ching and the Christian scriptures together. So he's written it, but it needs revising. So I'm revising it for him, as I guess we're going to co-author this thing. And hopefully we'll see where that goes. Probably that'll be the next thing to get published after this other book.
So we'll have to have you back in again for that book.
Yeah, I knew nothing about the Tao Te Ching, so I'm learning a lot, and most people don't know anything about it. So I think he's onto something. He said it's no one's ever done this before, and he put 5 years into writing this book. So I really had to honor that and do what I can to help him out. So that's a big goal right now, is working on that. And then this, I've turned this other book into a workshop. I just came back from giving a workshop up north on Still Green and Growing. Basically, the book put into a workshop format, and they want me to come back again, so we'll see where that all goes.
That's fantastic. And so, of course, through our website and through the podcasting venues that we have, if anybody has any questions, so on and so forth for you, we'll pass them on, and we'll have them in contact with you in some sort of capacity, if that's all right with you.
Yeah.
So my other question is what kind of communities are you involved in lately when it comes to sobriety, so on and so forth, aside from WA, like just working with normies and so on and so forth, like step 5s? I know you and I do quite a bit of step 5s, and how are you liking those?
I love spiritual direction, and I love step 5s. I wish I had more time. Thank God you're helping me out there. I'll pass them on to you, because right now I'm just traveling too much and working on this other book, because the last few I've had to say, contact Justin. But there's something really powerful about being able to help somebody receive a step 5 and sort of track them and see where they've been and what they've gone through, and maybe point them in a direction and help them move forward. And it's pretty powerful stuff. And spiritual direction is the same. It's just amazing. Even with dreams, people sharing their dreams and taking those seriously now too. And just to see how God is working in people's lives in different ways, and how some people are resisting God working in their lives. That's really sad. It makes that's where my heart breaks, is when I see what people could be experiencing, but there's a lot of fear, and they're stuck on maybe their own addiction, I guess, to whatever they're addicted to. And it's sad when you can't see people break out of that. I wish everybody could get into the program.
So, so your thoughts about, if we can direct a little bit into society, your thoughts on this whole gender issue. How do you feel about that?
Well, it's a pretty difficult one, It's going to need a lot of thinking, reflecting, to sorting out, to see where we're going to land on this, because I think in our society we're on a little bit of a bandwagon, a little bit, that somehow we're not respecting where people are at, who they really are, and we're trying to make them to something else, and that saddens me. And I think people need to just get to love themselves as they are, and you don't have to try to put them in another direction. I
think it comes down to that trying to learn how to love yourself and accept yourself for who you are, right? I mean, that's, again, we keep running back to that place time and time again where it's inner. Well, right?
I can give an example of how devastating it is when we don't really love ourselves. And this is 1976, and I was ordained 2 years already, and I was at a retreat, and we were suggested we should forgive our fathers. And sorry, I have to go back on that one. I've already covered that. This is something different. I was just outside in this retreat walking with somebody, and another oblate was coming this way. He looked up, saw me, and he said, "Gee, Sylvain, it's good to see your face again." And without thinking, I responded, "Sure, if you got nothing better to look at."
Oh, wow.
He said, "I do every time I look in the mirror," and I could see through the corner of my eye he was kind of hurt, and he just walked away. And I felt like crawling under the pavement. I thought, why did I say that? Where did that come from? What was going on? And that spoiled my whole retreat. I was beating myself up about that, and I had to think about that and reflect on it. And I realized after a while, Sylvain, you're struggling with low self-esteem, low self-worth. You didn't believe him. You don't love yourself. I had to admit, I had to face that. That was the awful truth, and it's painful, but thank God I became aware of it at least, and I could work on it. And I had to realize that, okay, I didn't really love myself. And when we don't love ourselves, it's hard to receive love from others or even love them or even believe that God loves us. We might think that God made junk. So it's really, really basic. If we don't love ourselves, and that's a commandment, well, they're in trouble. And it'll show up in ways like that. We won't even realize it sometimes, but that just kind of escaped out of me. And I had to figure out where it's coming from. And where it was coming from was exactly that. Low self-esteem, low self-worth, didn't love myself. And then we're vulnerable to almost anything.
So my question is, how do you prove to yourself every day that you love yourself?
I think when I find myself saying thank you, and I'm grateful. I think if there's one prayer that we could say every day, it would be enough. It'd just be thank you, thank you, thank you. Because a grateful person is a happy person. And what's really good is that we can thank God for all the crap that happened in our lives, because God turns everything to the good. I mean, I had 2 major burnouts, 2 major resignations, and I'm number 3 in the Enneagram, which I need to succeed and fear failure, and bingo, it's exactly where I went, maybe where I had to go to realize that, okay, failure is okay, I can learn from it, and I'm still okay, and God loves me. And so Isaiah 43, verse 1-4, that turned me around way back when my spiritual director gave it to me, and that was a beginning for me, and I'd encourage anybody to read that passage, Isaiah chapter 43, verse 1-4, where God says to Israel, I give Egypt for you, I give Cush for you. Should you walk through water, you're not going to drown. Walk through fire, you're not going to burn. And in the end, verse 4, it's in the New Jerusalem Bible, I love the way that was translated. It says, you are precious and honored in my sight because I love you. So here I am, a young oblate seminarian, workaholic, and I hear God telling me, Sylvain, you are precious and honored in my sight, not because of anything you've done, but just because I love you. Period. Can I accept that? It took a while. Then the self-esteem starts to, oh, God loves me just the way I am. I don't have to do or be anything. And that was major turning point for me, and I encourage anybody to go there.
I think that's one of the things I always bring up in a step 5 when we're going through this step 5, and they hold the water for everything, from sexual abuse all the way to the stuff that they're supposed to hold the water for. And then I say to them, can you forgive yourself? And they look at me like strange eyes, like I have a choice. Well, yeah, you have a choice. And they say, yeah, I can. And then I would ask them, well, why is it that you're not showing yourself that you can forgive yourself? Are you bigger than your own God? Are you bigger than the higher power that you have created? Because essentially the higher power that you've created is the higher power that you understand.
Yeah.
That's the reason why, like, God could be a Catholic God. God could be a Jewish God. That's just how you understand it. That's the formation of it.
Yeah.
And so when we really look at God itself, it's an understanding of God. When we're looking at it through the eyes of the program.
Yeah, step 3.
And so when we're doing that, we're literally writing out what attributes our God has. So is he kind, loving, caring, selfish, so on and so forth. So when we're looking at those things, what we have to recognize is that your God is the best that he is. And the only thing that we can ever agree upon is that God itself is perfect. Mm-hmm. He's not perfectly imperfect like we are. Mm-hmm. He's perfect.
Yeah.
And so how dare you think that you're bigger than your own God,
Sure.
Saying that, well, you can forgive all of them, God, but how dare you forgive me?
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the signs that when we do love ourselves is the ability to forgive ourselves. And what helped me along the way was one of my low points when I was beating myself up after one of my resignations, was somebody came to me and said to me, Sylvain, your refusal to forgive yourself is worse than anything else you've ever done. And that hit me between the eyes. I said, really? My refusal to forgive myself is worse than anything else I've ever done? And that got through to me. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. So here I am, like you say, I'm bigger than God. Like God can't forgive this.
Yeah.
My refusal to forgive myself was worse than anything I've ever done. That was the big sin, was that refusal. So yeah, that got through to me, and I started to realize, okay, I can forgive myself just about anything now. And I mess up a few times. I've done it recently, and I thought, well, it bothers me for a while, and I talk about it and share the feelings, and I pray about it, and I say, okay, if I can't apologize, you carry on. I'd do good some other way, and I turn it to the Holy Spirit, and I say, well, Lord, you take care of this because I can't do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
A comment I made just flippant, it was meant to be a joke, was taken the wrong way, and these 3 people left, and I have no idea who they are. This was in church, and I thought, oh my God, I guess I said the wrong thing, but I'll never see them again.
It's one of these.
So I just forgive myself for that. I made a mistake, admit it, and turn it over to the Holy Spirit and say, you take care of it.
It's one of these things too I learned recently, is that I am not responsible for other people's feelings.
Yeah.
Because what it boils down to is I don't mean to be malice.
Yeah.
And if I'm being cautious about it, then that's okay, But if I said something that offends somebody, well, they should probably get a sponsor. Really. I mean, go talk about it to somebody. And if it really bothers you, then come back and talk to me.
Exactly.
There's no point in allowing me to run rent in your head, so to say.
And that's precisely what most people don't do, or aren't able to do, or scared to do, is to just go and use the process of forgiveness and say, listen, when you said that the other day, this is how I felt. I actually walked away, and I need to let you know that I'm trying to forgive you. Then I can apologize. And then there's reconciliation. And the interesting thing is that when that happens, the relationship can actually be stronger than it was before because of all the love involved in the reconciliation process, communicating with love.
And it's funny that here we go to meetings, and these strangers do that, practicing it. And we've been told this stuff since we were children, that you need to talk about the I feeling words, right? And here you have adults that are learning how to reconstruct healthy relationships, and what's the foundation of that? Well, it's the 12 steps, but it's also the fact that we have to recognize who we are in order to be able to articulate that to somebody else and why we feel the way that we feel, not this 7-Eleven word. Yeah, I'm great. Yeah, glad. Yeah. Good.
Fine.
That's not what we were meant to be. We were meant to be exacting in our nature of how we feel. That's why we have these words, and that's really missing. People have a really hard time with that, and it's very, very unfortunate. And again, here we are in a society, outraged society, because that's the only thing society knows. They only know how to be outraged, and they only know how to be one-sided on everything. They're not willing to be empathetic towards anything at all. They would rather look at things like, how dare you? I mean, I think one of the hardest things for an alcoholic is to look at another alcoholic coming in the rooms in the beginning and say, shit, you're sick, you know, because we look at them and we say, why don't you just get these steps? But the reality is they're still sick, you know, and I'm not saying that I'm not sick. What I am saying is I have a reprieve today, and that reprieve is going to meetings, doing the steps and doing what I have to do in my daily life. Whereas these guys coming in, you see them come in and they say, oh, my step 4 made me go out. Well, no, it was probably your step 3 that made you go out, you know? And then I've seen attitudes from those old timers in the rooms where they're sitting there going, why don't they just get it? You know? And my sponsor, my first sponsor, 28 years sober he used to say this to me all the time. He would say, we never kick the wounded, but your credibility is for shit. You know? You have to show me your credibility now. That's what's upon you. And I remember when he said that to me, it made a heck of a lot of sense, because we see so many people come in and out. And as we say, it's unfortunate when people can't adhere to a simple principle of honesty, you know? And I tell my sponsees all the time, I don't care if you lie to me. I'm not going to catch you. I don't care. All I care about is that you stop lying to yourself. You know, that's all I care about. And just be honest to me about you. That's all I care about, you know? I don't care about the stories. I don't care about what you've done. All I care about is your feelings, you know? And I say this all the time. I don't really remember what happened in my active addiction. I remember things, but I don't remember if what I did is really what I did, because it was an alibi that I had to have. And so because of that, I'm always second guessing my past. However, what I do remember is all of the emotions I felt. And there was a plethora of deep, dark, nasty feelings. And then all of a sudden from there, the turning point happened, and I've never had to revisit them. I get instances and bits, but quickly do they sweep away because I'm in pursuit of happiness all of the time, right? I mean, I have experiences that were bad, but I only have good memories today. And that's the reality of it, right? That's what this thing gave me.
And that's the other thing about the program, is when you do steps 6 and 7 and you really forgive people, you don't have to forget or try to forget, because addiction's all about medicating pain. It's all about numbing out and trying to forget, trying to stuff stuff, and every time we stuff emotions, we're emotionally abusing ourselves. But what the forgiveness does, it frees us to remember. And because the pain is gone, there's no more painful emotions. We've forgiven, we've let it go. There's no anger, resentment, bitterness, whatever. And we can remember what happened, and it becomes sacred. Those are sacred wounds, and we can help other people. I like that saying: name it, claim it, don't blame it, tame it, then you can aim it.
Oh wow,
I love that, because it's true. You know, name it. What is it? What are you dealing with? What is it? Addiction? Is it defect of character? What? Well, then claim it. It's yours. You know, don't blame anybody else. It's yours. But then heal it, deal with it. You know, and then you can aim it. You can help somebody else out, and that's what Jesus did with the upper room appearances. Here, look at my hands, my side. Put your fingers in there, and look what they did to me. But look how I handled it. Forgiveness, forgiveness, forgiveness.
I think that's in your book, Walk a New Path. The description of 6 and 7 really lays that out. You know what I mean? It really, really lays that out.
Well, that's because I was lost when I got there. I had no idea where to go. And Vaughn was the same thing. You know, he appreciated the step 6 and 7. Yeah, because that's the core of the program. It's right in the middle. You know, the program's like a hamburger. You know, you got 4 and 5 as the top patty, and 8 and 9 is the bottom patty, and then right in the middle is 6 and 7. And without that, change, transformation doesn't really happen. You experience some forgiveness. There might be a little reconciliation, but that inner transformation doesn't really happen, and that's what it's all about. I like Richard Rohr's line, you know, transformed people transform people. Last night we had the men's gathering, and it was there was a song there about hurt people hurt people. Just the opposite, and it's really true. Hurt people hurt other people. Transform people transform people. And we transmit the pain, we don't transform. If we don't transform our pain, we're going to transmit it. Horizontal violet's going to come out one way or the other, you know, and it does all the time. So
I've also heard in the rooms, a sick person cannot heal a sick person.
Yeah.
And you're only as sick as your secrets.
Yeah.
And that's 100% true. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know how many people I can tell after a step 5, as somebody's walking out, how quick they're going to be calling their sponsor saying, how did it happen again? I can almost bet. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I can bet is because you can't bullshit a bullshitter, you know? And I can see it. I can see it happening in front of my own eyes. I mean, the questions I always go over is, have you ever been sexually abused? If I don't hear any of that, because our job as a step 5 facilitator is to ask these questions. I mean, we're there to help them adhere to the principle of honesty between somebody else and the God that they've created, their own understanding of their own higher power. That's our job as a facilitator. And to sit there and just listen, it doesn't always work. You know, you have to ask questions. The book says it's supposed to be a dialogue, you know. And I had a guy come in just recently before, and he did a step 5. He's Catholic, and he said the difference between a step 5 and a confession is there's a dialogue. And he said, I'm pointed to show what my part is within that confession, so to say. He said in a confessional, the priest isn't telling you that. All they give you is your penance and out you go, and that's it, that's all. But he said, how do I ever know how to fix my sin or my shortcomings if I'm never told what my part is? Yeah. Because it's obvious that I don't know what it is. And I said to him, you know, well, an act of contrition, you're supposed to kind of see that, you know? And I think that's where we're not being explained to what an act of contrition really is. Yeah,
I agree. And I think there's a real comparison. There's a parallel, but also comparison of the program with the Sacrament of Reconciliation. I actually have that as an appendix in the book, you know, because I got this idea of putting them side by side. And, you know, steps 1, 2, and 3 is basically contrition. I'm sorry. Step 4 is basically examination of conscience. You know, step 5 is basically a confession. Step 8 and 9 is basically penance, you know, making amends. Step 10, 11, 12 is reconciliation. What's missing in the church kind of over the years, over the centuries maybe, is step 6 and 7, healing. You know, getting rid of my defects of character and praying that God will take them away. I think we have ignored that or kind of somehow missed that over the years in the church. And this is something that because, you know, like when I grew up, went to confessions, wiped the slate clean and start all over again. That was the idea. After 20 years of that, you kind of get, this is boring, you know? Yeah. No one was really mentioning transformation, healing, change, you know? Even one person actually told me, we're born, God created us the way we are, and that's the way we're supposed to stay. And I thought, what happens to change, transformation, you know? And I think that's what the program, that's the power of the program, is step 6 and 7. That's where change, transformation happens. And I think that's coming back to the church through that. So that's a gift that the program has that can be.
That's fantastic. I hope that more priests adopt that idea. Yeah. You know, because I mean, it boils down to the diocese can say whatever they want to say, but if the priest isn't going to practice that within their own parish, it's lost.
I would really encourage, you know, I encourage every priest. Actually, we had a reconciliation celebration one time, and we weren't that many penitents, so quite a few priests. So I thought, well, there's no rush, so I could take a little bit more time with each person, and I focused on some of those that were struggling with character defects or whatever, and I pray for healing for them, which takes 30 seconds or whatever. And the pastor kind of took me to task a little bit. How come I was taking so long? I said, well, this is not just like, just tell your sins and walk away. It's deeper. I like to bring in the healing dimension a little bit, and I would encourage all of us who are in ministry to focus on that. Yeah, to include that in whatever we're doing. Just be more aware of it, at least.
That's fantastic. I think we got about an hour in, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it up. I thank you very much for coming in today. Yeah. I suspect that my listeners will be really, really pleased with this.
All right. Well, there's one of the really healing medicines is humor. So is it okay if I tell one?
Sure.
What's the difference between being addicted to bingo and being addicted to alcohol?
I don't know.
People that are addicted to bingo remember their last blackout. Thought you might appreciate that.
That's great. So with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. And like I said, I'm going to put in all of the ways to be able to pick up Walk a New Path through Amazon, and you'll see things on LinkedIn, so on and so forth. And I thank you again for coming in. And
thanks for the invitation. Really enjoyed it.
We'll probably catch up with you in a couple months.
Sounds great.
If that's okay with you. And if there's any questions from any of the listeners, you can just go to the website and just punch them in. You'll see the little icon that asks you if you want to talk to me, you can. And I would also ask you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and Stitches. We're on all avenues of media. And I thank you for listening. Bye for now.